I heard it on the news. Well, hey there, welcome back. I seldom give disclaimers, and one of the only times I did that was when I interviewed Mr. John McAfee because he dropped F-bombs every 12 and a half seconds. And Jesse Peterson had some very specific beliefs. But this isn't an interview. This is me talking with you for my normal 10 minutes. So the disclaimer relates to what I'm about to say, and the disclaimer is this. I am not having a political discussion with you. It's going to feel that way a little bit. Parts of you may kick in and go, wait a second. Are you trying to control the way that I consume information? The answer is yes. I'm not actually trying to control it. I'm trying to, and what do I do at the beginning of every podcast, is make you aware of something. We've chatted a number of times on how language affects perception, and that when you have a word for something, you can perceive it better than someone who doesn't have a word for it, and vice versa is also true. If you're missing vocabulary for something, or if you have a very limited vocabulary for something, then you may find it difficult to sense it and express thoughts about it. Russian people having a specific word for light blue, while American speakers natively typically have a word for light red, which is pink. I was having a discussion with someone a while back, and something they said and their phraseology of it really struck me because I could see just how firmly it was embedded in their mind. And it wasn't the fact or the thing that they were talking about, but it was the source. And it wasn't even the source because I never learned the specific source. I only learned her label for it. And we did a podcast on labels, so please go listen to that as well. The label she used was, I heard it on the news. Think about that. Think about the absolute of the news. It wasn't this news source reported this, various news outlets are saying this, I read in the da-da-da-da journal this. It was the news. The person who says this and applies this label, there are three things you need to know. First of all, they probably get that information from a specific channel that they chose arbitrarily or by choice or what have you a long time ago. They have since then labeled this something else. And thirdly, their brain has decided that this is an absolute. And that's a problem. Do you know why that's a problem? Because there is no such thing as the news. I heard it on the news. No, you didn't. What you heard was a person interpreting through their filters, bias, and requirements to give you a certain kind of information that you feel comfortable with. But it is one of many, many, many sources. And you have taken that source and that singular person and decided that this is as absolute as heat and cold, as up and down. We can apply absolutes to things in physics and chemistry and so forth. Maybe not so much biology, but we're getting there. We can apply absolutes of going, we know if we let go of this, it drops. Now, we're all on the same planet. Everyone listening to this, as far as I know, is on this planet. Now, in 4 years from now, when this reaches Proxima Centauri and there's life there and they're able to hear this stuff, and this is somehow broadcast in a way that would actually leave the atmosphere, well, then hello, how are you? But everyone's on this planet and we have a shared experience, and that shared experience is when we drop stuff, it falls because of gravity, because of a very specific gravity that we all share. It is, for all intents and purposes in our reality, an absolute. When I say ice to you, because of our shared reality, for the most part, you're going to think of water ice, and you're going to think of a specific kind of water ice. And when I say specific kind of water ice, you're going to go, wait, there's only one specific kind of water ice, unless you have ice made of some other kind of water or something. Or maybe it's dry ice. Aha, I got you there, Mark. So on Earth, for the most part, we're going to experience one kind of ice. But there are literally over 11 kinds of ice that can be created depending on the situation, depending on the conditions, like extreme pressure and even high heat, believe it or not. So though we all kind of believe ice is an absolute, that's a blurry one too. But let's get back to the news. Years ago, before the internet was a thing, and yes, I'm that old, I worked with a gentleman who said his little girl tended to not believe what he would tell her unless he said, "I read it in a big book." So that told me that in her mind, a big book was a source of important and factual information. And even before that, people would have things like Encyclopedia Britannica. You'd go to the library and you'd look up something in a book. So for the most part, we could assign the absolute value of information to it getting to the stage of being published. And then you can further refine that absoluteness by looking at the publisher and the credentials. If it's somebody who actually has a bunch of letters after their name, they're a known scientist, or it's in a scientific journal, then your concept of how absolute the information is solidified further. The danger of defining one particular news source or source of information as the news is it gets carte blanche on everything. It means you believe everything that comes through it because it is true information in your mind. And if you've read The Three Voices, a book I wrote not too long ago that was endorsed by a clinical psychologist about the three voices our brains use to communicate with ourselves and other people, then you know that I believe we have a first voice, which is basically the thing that we call intuition, gut instinct, and so forth. It's that thing that seems to always be right that we not always listen to. Though that thing, that binary thing that understands right and wrong and up and down and all that stuff and just says, look, I'm only going to give you the answer you asked for. That's it. No, you're not going to convince me. You're probably not going to listen to me. You probably shouldn't eat that cake, but oh, I know you worked hard, so much for that answer. But sometimes even your first voice can get corrupted based on your experiences. I think objectively, it's much better to have multiple sources of information and then do the homework on sifting through it to find out the distilled reality of what you're actually learning. Even if you found a particular single source that seemed to be right pretty much all of the time, I would still suggest having multiple sources. Let me give you a scientific example of that. In this day and age, everyone pretty much has navigation. On their phone, in their car, they have maps, all that stuff. All that's possible because we have these little tiny satellites up above the Earth orbiting all the time. These satellites, all they do is just go beep, beep. They do these little pings. And we have our software says, how long did that ping take to get to me? How long did the ping from the other satellite take to get to me? How long did the ping from the third satellite? And once you have three, you can have triangulation. And once you have triangulation, you have a fairly accurate position. But the phone and the software and the hardware doesn't stop there. It'll continue to get more and more pings from more satellites. Why? Well, because what if something is slightly off from one of the satellites? What if there's interference, atmospheric interference, or the software itself was unresponsive in some way? The more satellites, the more accuracy. Even though all of the satellites are trying to tell you the same thing. And that's just GPS. So imagine if all the satellites weren't trying to tell you the same thing, and you decided you were going to pick satellite number 3. Do you see how that could be a problem? I'm saying this to you on many facets. I'm saying this to you because we need to be really careful about where we place our labels. And again, on the Label podcast, labels can make you smart and dumb, sometimes at the same time. There's a reason for labels, but they can be easily misused. So when you place a label on something in your mind and you have placed that label when you say, I heard on the news, that can be very detrimental. Multiple sources of information is always a good thing as well. I I would think that anyone listening to this podcast also reads books and watches other webinars and listens to other podcasts and so forth. Of course, this is your favorite, and I appreciate that. And you're a really smart person for saying that. Thank you so much. But in all seriousness, it's the additional information from other sources that can sort of reinforce what you're hearing. You can say, oh, yeah, everyone's sort of saying that. This one might be saying it in a more fun way. I'd like to think that I'm showing you things that might be things that people usually don't notice, or things that people don't think about. And I try to make you aware of it and then give you something to do with it in a matter of about 10 minutes. And I more than encourage you to look elsewhere for other information from competing information to sort of sort through it yourself. I think that's a really fun journey to be on, because you're not going to say, I heard it on the podcast. Well, which one? There are over 3.9 million podcasts out there. This one just happens to be in the top 5%, if you can believe that, which is really cool. So thank you, as always, for listening. Take care.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, you might enjoy my books. Check them out on Amazon.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.